So my name's Sarah Bearchell. I'm here today representing the Lightyear Foundation as their STEM lead, but you may have come across me in a freelance capacity. The work that we do at the Lightyear Foundation is specifically tailored to breaking down the barriers to disabled children taking part in STEM. So by that, we're talking about children with physical disabilities, a range of impairments, and children with special needs. The thing is, the things that we've learned by working with these children are actually applicable to you, whether you're working, with children, adults, or whoever online. So I really hope you'll find some useful tips in here. So I've been chatting with the Lightyear Foundation for a while about maybe going on board and working with them. Because they were doing lots of sort of dance-based classes on science themes with disabled children to try and get ideas across, very physical participation things. And we've been talking about me going in and doing a bit more of the sort of like hands-on experiments rather than an interpretation. And then along came this thing, which as biologists, you all know exactly what this is. Lovely coronavirus, which changed everything for everyone, frankly. So it changed the discussions that we were having, and Lightyear Foundation decided what they needed was to get some science experiments that would complement their dance classes, and that was the first thing they did. They were publicising the dance classes on, like, they were on This Morning and they were on Good Morning Britain and all sorts of stuff, lots of lovely TV coverage for children with special needs. And they decided they wanted to boost this by having an experiment to go with each class. So you can see here a screenshot from the website, which shows the sensory science experiments. And that's kind of like everybody did at the start of the pandemic, like a mad sort of, let's put stuff online, let's make videos, put them all online. But these videos were a little bit different because children with special needs need different access points to the science. So there's no point in trying to give them resources, that might be tailored to Key Stage 3 when they can't necessarily access that, and their parents might not have the skills to adapt those for the children themselves. So these experiments that we put online were very much about, here's something you can do, now go away and try it. And they, as you can see from the pictures there, I'm just introducing myself there with a hello, my name is Sarah. You can see some of those signs on there. So we use Makaton, which is a simplified sign language which supports the spoken word. So we started producing those, and they got a really, really good sort of like interest from children who were regular users of the charity, and also people from further afield. Because that's what we learned with doing things online, is that, yes, you can increase your geographical reach. And then we had a conversation, but what if, what could we do next? And we had this mad idea to, we were going to have an online science club, just like everybody else was setting up. And it would be via Zoom, and it would be for children with special needs. That'd be really cool. And the thing is, people were setting these up for mainstream children in their own homes. So why couldn't we do it for children with special needs? It shouldn't be that hard to do. So we approached the Ogden Trust, who were absolutely brilliant about it. So Ogden Trust deal with sort of physics teaching in primary schools in particular. And they could see the sense in what we were trying to achieve. And this is a screenshot from one of our sessions, you can see there, with some of our teenagers who joined in. And we'll come back to why there's not many people on the screen in that picture in a moment. But you can see that we actually managed to achieve it. So in terms of putting stuff online, what are the key things? Well, preparation. I mean, it's like, what are other words for vitally important? You really, really need to put in lots of preparation and think of lots of things up front, because it just pays off so much in the end, in terms of designing your activity and in terms of ensuring that you have the photographs that you can use for your report to funders and things like that. So preparation really is key. So the first thing is know your audience. And this is true of live or online work that you might be doing. So first of all, you need to build relationships with the people you're making this for. So speak to children in primary school, or go to your local autism group on a Thursday evening and meet the people that you're designing your activity for. Then you can learn what their communication methods are, whether they're using British Sign Language, Makaton, whether they're speaking, or if they use communication devices, because that all impacts on how you are going to present your material to them. Also think about the dexterity of the people that you're going to work with. And this is true whether you're working with pensioners or children. You know, if somebody's got a wrist brace for arthritis, that can be at any age, not just elderly people. Think also about individual access requirements. So if you're working with a small group, that's really nice and easy if you know who's going to turn up. But quite often in outreach activities, you don't know who's going to pitch up to your event, you know, at the local you know, nature reserve. You don't know who's going to come, but you can think about what their needs might be. In terms of safeguarding, this is absolutely key when working with children in any setting, but specifically online. So at the Lightyear Foundation, the key staff are trained by the NSPCC, and then they oversee everything that everybody else does. We also seek upfront photo and video permissions, and that's a really key thing, because you want to make sure when you frame your photos that you're keeping certain people out, or because it's much easier to exclude them from the photo in the first place or have the back of their head than it is to go through and remove them afterwards. And that's why in that first Zoom picture that I showed you, the slide that I showed you, it didn't have many faces in it, because lots of the children we work with are cared for children and cannot appear online and cannot be publicised in any way. So we just get them to turn off their screens when we want to take a screenshot. And that way we can protect them, but they still take part. And that is the key thing, that just because you can't have your photo taken, it shouldn't stop you from participating. We also asked that there be an adult technician, as we called them, in the room at all times. Now, the children absolutely loved this. They were the principal investigator or researcher, depending upon which children we were working with. That determined which term we used. And then they had their technician, their adult, who was there. Now, the technician was permitted to mop up spills and to fetch a spoon or a cloth or something from the cupboard that they might have forgotten. But the technician was not permitted to do the experiment. And in that way, the children felt like they had power over what was happening in their own experiment, and they really, really loved lording it over their parents as well and their carers, and it just worked really nicely. But that technician in the room, our adult watching from the child's end, enabled parents and families to feel confident of what we were actually doing with their child. It was a nice step in the safeguarding. So we sent out a risk assessment for every session in advance, and that's really key. But we also know that people don't read risk assessments. That's been demonstrated lots of times. So what we would also do is send bullet points in an email, asking them to make sure there was a stable waterproof setup for the device, because obviously if we're using water and they've got an iPad, you know, we need to keep these things separate. We asked that they had a pre-charged device to reduce cables on the table, and we asked to have a view of the child working, so that you could see what their hands were doing, so maybe a slightly lower angle than my screen's at the moment, so you can see what the child is doing and you can be sure if they're safe, and if something is going wrong you can call to their adult for help, their technician. We used trays and towels, so asking them to always work on a tea tray meant that spills were limited, but it also reduced anxiety for the children taking part, because they knew they weren't going to flood the kitchen or the living room, wherever they were working. So it helped to reduce that anxiety, which helped them to engage to a much better level. We also had our technician there who could do mopping up as well. But in the activities, there was no intention that there would need to be mopping up. I just point that out. We weren't trying to flood the place. It was just so that everybody felt safe and secure and able to participate. And everything was broken down in that risk assessment that went out in advance. In terms of session management, we had a Zoom commander in each session. Now you might have seen them in the top left-hand corner of the screen that I showed you. And that person was there just to run the technical side, which enabled me as the presenter, I guess, to get on with the job of teaching the science to them. And what the Zoom commander did was kept an eye out if we were losing anybody, you know, from spotty connections. And they also were able to mute microphones if the household got too loud. Now, that's a really key thing, because when you're doing something like this, like today, I'm talking to you and I can't see your faces. I'm getting zero feedback sound-wise, and it's quite weird. So when we work with children, it's nice to have the microphone switched on, because then we can hear what they're saying. We can hear if they're stuck or something. But sometimes the noise gets too loud, and that can become really off-putting for certain people. So our Zoom commander could just sort of like monitor the sound levels and just keep everything under control. And they also had the contact number of the adult, the technician, so that they could phone them if there was a problem with the technology. And then we had our technician there who was also helping things. So maybe steadying a spoon, they were allowed to steady a spoon for measuring, but they weren't allowed to do the measuring, that kind of thing. And we also use these, we call these traffic light indicators. I'll hold them up to the camera for you. There you go. So these are available from YPO, the school suppliers online. And you have like a happy face on green, you've got sort of like middle face on amber, and an angry face or a sad face on red. And if people were muted, we needed for them to have a communication method to get to us. So if they were stuck, they just held up the red face right in front of their camera, and we could pause and speak to them. It had to be very interactive, and we needed ways to communicate even if we didn't have sound. And these were also useful for voting, for getting feedback as well at the end of sessions. We also discovered that if you have two siblings joining from one house, definitely make them share a device, because seriously, the broadband cannot cope. And that was something that we had to change and set up as we went. In terms of equipment, we had funding to send the children a kit box in advance. It was really important that the equipment should not be a barrier to participation. So we sent them out things like plastic measuring beakers and a lab coat, things which they might not have at home, but which would make them feel part of it, and they could keep it afterwards as a special sort of present for them. And we also sent out a you will need list, which were things like a tray, a cereal bowl, a spoon. And I think the most expensive thing we put on the you will need list was 4 tablespoons of washing up liquid and 2 tablespoons of salt or something. So we were keeping all of the requirements of the families really, really low, whilst also not trying to send like trays and bowls in the post, because that would just be daft. So after we'd run the club in homes, children started going back to school, and the first virtual labs that we ran in school were a mixture of children working from home and in the classroom, which was somewhat chaotic, as Louise Archer mentioned earlier this morning in her session about the chaos of having people joining on different systems and from different places with different levels of discipline and supervision. That was an interesting step, and I agree with what she was saying on that, definitely. But as we've moved on, the sessions have been delivered into schools directly. And here you can see some lovely Key Stage 3 pupils in their lab coats with their magnifying glasses, and they got to keep those things. So it gave them a real sense of sort of ownership of what they were doing. So what did we actually learn doing the virtual lab? Well, definitely that relationships are absolutely key to the success. Knowing people in advance and getting to know their needs and what would work for them is absolutely key. Each session started with a kit check, so the children were rapidly engaged with what they were doing, and then we moved quickly onto the activities. There was no opportunity to get bored or start fidgeting. And we also discovered that signing can help everyone. So in the electricity virtual lab that we ran, if you want to use Makaton signing to sign an insulator, you make your dominant hand like this, and then you push it towards your non-dominant hand like that. And that means insulator. The electricity can't get through. And if you want to sign conductor, your non-dominant hand has like a little Star Trek-y split in it, and you make your hand go through, and that is a conductor. And it just conveys in an extra way that the electricity can get through. So signing can really help everyone. So as I've said already about using trays and having towels ready, anticipating mess reduces anxiety. I used a high visual contrast background for when I was showing what I was actually doing. So I had like a white work tray, but I also had a black tablecloth, so I could alternate between the two whilst I was working. We used Lockstep instructions. Now, this is a teacher term, and it's also sometimes called slow science, where you literally give a step, such as take a spoonful of salt. And everybody gets their spoonful of salt, having seen me demonstrate it. Then the next step will be use your leveler to make it flat. So then we're measuring a level teaspoon of salt. But if I were to say measure a level teaspoon of salt, that might not happen. So by giving really key, clear, broken down steps, that really helps work to happen. And it also means that the children do it for themselves. And that's so important. And again, you know, the traffic light indicators were very valuable for all sorts of steps. So what we learned as well was that, yes, you can increase your geographical reach and reach out to people who might have transport difficulties to get to an after school club or other family commitments, but it can also exclude due to technology. So if you have somebody who does not have you know, their own broadband, if they don't have a device that they can use for the session, you can't reach them. So it doesn't reach everyone. It's not the answer to all of our problems. But the main thing that we learned from doing this is something that I've actually learned by doing sort of science hands-on with children anyway, is ownership. It is so key that children should do the experiment for themselves, that they should do all of that process for themselves, because then they will learn so much more. So you might need to change the activity that you're doing so the child can do everything themselves. And I've got some horrible examples of that, but I won't share them right now. So yeah, if you set up your online sessions with lots of preparation, you can achieve this. Look at those lovely happy faces and how engrossed they are in their own experiments. Even we've got one mum on the shot there who was absolutely brilliant. She was fascinated by what we were doing, but she's not interfering with her child. That technician is being a good technician. And you can't even see the other parents because they're off camera. But it's just really nice to see the children are doing the experiments for themselves, and they're confident to appear on camera and show us what they're doing. So that was our main learnings from the virtual lab. So if you would like more information about working with people with special needs in STEM fields, there's a network on LinkedIn called the SEN in STEM network, which is run by the Lightyear Foundation. And if you hate LinkedIn, and I can understand if you might, you can join the group by going to info@lightyearfoundation.org. And what happens is there are about 3 meetings a year, generally held online at the moment, and it's just for sharing best practice in methods that have been discovered. And it's sort of driven by users. So if you have something you want to discuss, put it forward and it'll get included in a meeting.